The conversation about global trade tensions between the United States and China has been shaped by years of tariffs, accusations of unfair practices, and strategic maneuvering on both sides. But in recent days, a shift has appeared, one that suggests a new possibility, easing tensions rather than escalating them. It begins in Washington, where the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent sat for a nationally broadcast interview to update the public on the state of ongoing negotiations. His tone was measured, direct, and notably optimistic. The atmosphere surrounding US-China economic relations has been tense for years, but the Secretary's message suggested something different, something that signaled movement. In the interview, Scott Bessent described a series of recent exchanges between American and Chinese negotiators, outlining that progress had been made on issues that only months earlier seemed entrenched. He conveyed that the risk of a dramatic escalation in tariffs had receded. In his words, "I can tell you we had a very good 2 days. So I would expect that the threat of the 100% has gone away, as has the threat of the immediate imposition of the Chinese initiating a worldwide export control regime." His statement signaled two things. First, that the United States believed China had stepped back from retaliation, and second, that the United States in turn was not preparing to impose further economic pressure at this moment. The phrase 100% referred to the proposed doubling of tariffs on select Chinese goods, a threat that represented one of the sharpest economic weapons Washington had placed on the table. This development comes at a moment shaped by a scheduled meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The meeting will take place in South Korea, signaling both geography and symbolism, a region where American and Chinese influence often intersects, and where military, diplomatic, and economic power all converge. The timing suggests the negotiations have reached a stage where political leaders, not just trade officials, need to finalize the outcome. Another issue discussed was the long-debated matter of TikTok, the China-based social media platform with a massive global user base. For years, American lawmakers have raised security concerns, arguing that the platform's data storage systems, ownership structure, and potential ties to Chinese regulatory oversight present risks. There have been numerous attempts to negotiate, restructure, or restrict TikTok's presence in the United States. Many of those efforts stalled as both sides disagreed on the terms. But Scott Bessent said the situation has now shifted. "We reached a final deal on TikTok," he explained. "We'd reached one in Madrid. And I believe that as of today, all the details are ironed out, and that will be for the two leaders to consummate that transaction on Thursday in Korea." His phrasing emphasized two elements. The technical work has been completed, and the political approval must now occur during the upcoming presidential meeting. This suggests a possible restructuring of the company's ownership or oversight, potentially placing certain data management operations under direct US jurisdiction, but the details are not yet public, and what will be signed will depend on what both leaders deem acceptable. However, while progress in negotiations appears steady, the United States is simultaneously dealing with internal political challenges. A partial government shutdown has unfolded in Washington, triggered by disagreements over federal budget measures. Some lawmakers have declined to approve temporary funding, resulting in limited interruptions in certain public services. The interview addressed how this internal conflict affects international credibility. Scott Bessent minimized the diplomatic impact, but expressed frustration with the domestic situation. "I don't think it's going to hurt. It's a global embarrassment what these Democratic senators are doing. Keeping the government shut down. I mean, look at the numbers. It's 52-3, 52 Republican senators, 3 Democratic senators have come across the line. So I just think it's an embarrassment. Doesn't affect his ability on the international stage. Now, what it does affect is it's starting to affect the economy. It's starting to slow down air traffic. And I would urge moderate Democrats to be heroes, come across the aisle like they did in the spring and pass a clean CR." His comment aimed to draw a distinction between domestic governance and international negotiation authority. The statement also attempted to apply public pressure toward ending the shutdown, pointing to the potential slowdown of aviation systems and the broader economic effects that would follow if the shutdown were to continue. The interview then shifted to a related controversy involving the province of Ontario in Canada. A series of advertisements appeared in US media markets criticizing American tariff increases. Scott Bessent said the ads were politically motivated and constituted foreign interference. I've read that the province of Ontario is spending up to $75 million on these advertisements, and it's propaganda coming across our border to decry the tariffs. So the Premier of Ontario seems to have come off the rails a little. He has taken the ads down, but what's the purpose of that other than to try to sway US public opinion? Well, we've seen that, I'm sure the US network has decried election interference. Well, this is interference in US sovereign matters. His argument framed the issue not only as a trade disagreement, but as one side attempting to influence the political process in the other country. This incident highlights the complex relationship between domestic messaging and foreign policy. Political leaders often attempt to shape international outcomes through public persuasion. But the line between advocacy and interference can be subjective, and when trade disputes emerge, communication strategies can escalate into diplomatic controversies. The Treasury Secretary's warning suggests that Washington interprets such messaging not merely as economic disagreement, but as a challenge to national decision-making authority. Beyond China and Canada, the interview also touched on Russia and the global energy market. The United States has pursued measures aimed at constraining Russian revenue, particularly through restricting oil sales. Scott Bessent stated, well, I think Russia is going to feel the pain immediately. I can tell you that we've already seen India has done a complete halt of Russian oil purchases. Many of the Chinese refineries, they have stopped. He implied that sanctions and purchasing shifts are beginning to reduce Russian export earnings. However, oil flows are complex, involving intermediaries, rerouted trade paths, and discounted sales. The suggestion that two major importers have halted purchases marks a significant development if sustained over time. He then expanded the point. The Russian economy is a wartime economy. Growth is virtually zero. Inflation, I believe, is over 20%. And everything we do is going to bring Vladimir Putin to the table. It's oil that funds the Russian war machine. And I think we can make a substantial dent in his profits. His statement reflects the US strategy: constrict revenue streams to limit Russia's military capabilities and pressure the leadership into negotiation. The strategy assumes that economic strain will translate into strategic concession, though historically, nations under wartime pressure have responded unpredictably, sometimes hardening positions before yielding. Amid these global negotiations and economic calculations, domestic politics continue to shape how messages are received. The partial government shutdown reflects the deep divisions within Congress, divisions that become visible to international partners. While the Treasury Secretary argues that foreign governments will not question Washington's credibility, the appearance of political gridlock can create uncertainty. In diplomacy, perception can be as influential as policy. At the same time, the upcoming meeting between President Trump and President Xi carries symbolic weight. It follows a period of strained relations marked by tariff escalations, technological competition, and strategic rivalry. The United States has long expressed concerns about intellectual property, manufacturing supply chains, and security in software environments. China, in turn, has asserted that American policies aim to contain its rise as a global economic power. The meeting offers an opportunity to reaffirm areas of cooperation while acknowledging ongoing disagreement. The presence of TikTok in this discussion underscores how deeply integrated technology has become in global power relations. Social media platforms are no longer simply entertainment tools. They shape public opinion, store personal data, and represent information networks that reach across borders. Control over platforms has implications for political discourse, market access, and national security. A finalized deal on TikTok, if confirmed, would represent a rare instance in which a high-profile tech dispute has been resolved through diplomacy instead of outright restriction. Meanwhile, the reported halt of Russian oil purchases by major importers would represent a significant realignment in energy supply chains. It suggests that the global energy map is transitioning in ways shaped by both economic incentives and geopolitical strategy. If China and India have altered their purchasing behavior, it could indicate a shift in how global powers intend to position themselves in relation to Russia's ongoing conflict and the Western sanctions network. However, independent verification will determine whether these adjustments are temporary tactical moves or structural changes. The developments also reflect the increased role of treasuries and finance ministries in shaping international policy. Economic tools, tariffs, sanctions, investment reviews, regulatory oversight have become primary instruments of statecraft. Decisions once made by diplomats are now increasingly influenced by finance officials who understand the economic leverage embedded in supply chains, capital flows, and market access. At the center of all of this is public perception. Trade negotiations are not simply technical discussions between policy teams. They shape employment levels, consumer prices, business investment decisions, and market confidence. When a Treasury Secretary makes statements suggesting progress, it affects not only government strategies, but also how companies plan for the future. Stability encourages investment. Uncertainty encourages caution. And both the United States and China understand that confidence can be a strategic tool. As the world awaits the outcome of the upcoming presidential meeting in Korea, questions remain. Will the shift in tone translate into long-term policy adjustments? Will the agreement on TikTok serve as a framework for future technology governance? And will easing tariff pressure lead to shared economic benefit or simply a temporary slowdown in a broader strategic rivalry? For now, the message from Washington is that progress has been made. The tone is cautious, but the implications are meaningful. The threat of an immediate tariff escalation appears to have receded. Diplomats and negotiators have laid groundwork that political leaders must now decide whether to approve. The story continues in the days ahead, on a stage where economic priorities, political leverage, and national interests intersect. The meeting in Korea is more than a handshake opportunity. It is a test of whether two powerful nations can manage competition without allowing it to escalate into confrontation. The next move will take place at the highest level. The outcomes will shape economies, influence global markets, and help determine how the world's two largest economic powers coexist in an era where cooperation and rivalry exist together, shaping the future one negotiation at a time.